Hi everyone, McKenna from Murder by the Book here. It looks like we are live on Facebook. I am so excited this afternoon because we have a special treat for everyone. We are joined by two historical mystery authors, Elsa Hart and Lindsey Davis. And I have to say, personally, it's a very big deal to me that I get to meet Lindsey Davis, even though virtually, because in all my years at the store, we've never hosted her while I was here, and it's such a treat. I'm also happy to be joined by Elsa, obviously, but she has been to the store, and we know her. I've met her in person, so it's talking like an old friend. But I get to meet Lindsey Davis today, so that's very exciting. So I'm going to kick into the bios, and then we'll get into questions. So Lindsey Davis was born and raised in Birmingham, England. After taking an English degree at Oxford and working for the civil service for 13 years, she ran away to be a writer. Her internationally best-selling novels feature ancient Roman detective Marcus Didius Falco, and they include Venus in Copper, The Iron Hand of Mars, Nemesis, and Alexandria. The Grove of Caesars, out this week, is in her current series of books centered around Flavia Alba, Falco's British-born adopted daughter and established female investigator. Davis is the recipient of the Crime Writers Association Cartier Diamond Dagger Award, the highest accolade for crime writers, as well as the Ellis Peters Historical Dagger Award and the Authors Club Best First Novel Award. Hi, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely.
Elsa Hart is the author of 3 acclaimed mystery novels set in 18th century China. The most recent, City of Ink, was one of Publishers Weekly's best books of 2018. The daughter of a journalist, Elsa was born in Rome and spent much of her childhood abroad, attending international schools in Moscow and Prague. She's drawn to stories about travelers throughout history and likes to put her own characters in places that are unfamiliar to them. She's here to discuss today The Cabinets of Barnaby Bane, also just out this week. Hi, Elsa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to be here with Lindsey Davis.
I know, I'm so excited about this. Okay, so the first thing I have is, first up, I'm so happy to be chatting with you both, but I think that that's been addressed. So before we get into the questions, I do want to say that both authors have been generous enough to send signed book plates, which I forgot to bring home as a prop, but we do have signed book plates for both of these. So if you order copies from us, we'll be happy to include one of those in your order. And I would actually say, I think that if you haven't read one of these authors and you want to order one of their books in paperback to start, we can also give you a signed book plate for that too, just to maybe get you started on a new author. If you have questions, I'm not going to be checking text. I'm going to be looking at Facebook for the comments to see any questions you might have for either author. I imagine we'll have a few, and I'll get to those later in the chat. So to get started, let's start with Lindsey. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Flavia Alba and where we find her in this book?
Okay, well, she started as someone who was just glimpsed in the background in a Falco novel, but when I needed a change of direction, I decided that she would be a good person to build a series around, and I'm now thinking about the 10th book, although it seems as though I've only just started, really. She's been adopted by my well-known protagonists, Falco and Helena. And for me, one of the interesting things about writing these books is to see them through her eyes. So she's rolling her eyes at the antics of parents who we readers, and even to some extent myself, have learned to put on a pedestal, and that is hilarious fun. I think when I first started writing about Falco, which was, dare I say it, in the late 1980s, probably before some people here were even born, it would have been very difficult to have a female protagonist set in ancient Rome, because there was so much to explain without going into, could a woman do that? But now I feel I've established that certainly a stroppy one like my Albia could certainly do it. And she's been allegedly trained by Falco, so she uses his methods. But it's a whole different scenario, really. And one of the things that I'm exploring, she has been married in the course of the series, and children, though not hers, are about to join the household. I'm exploring how in Roman society, although the textbooks tell you women were invisible, in fact, the tombstones, which may be more important, tell you that couples were the thing, couples were the main unit. And so I'm exploring how she and Tiberius, her husband, work together as a partnership in the domestic and work situations.
Something we can still relate to in this day.
Indeed.
Especially being stuck in the house in a pandemic with your spouse.
Yes, which I was saying before we started, I said to Elsa that if you're interested in history, actually, it's not as strange. If you're my generation, growing up just after the war, when they'd all carried gas masks around with them, things that some people are finding difficult actually do seem rather familiar.
Yeah. So Elsa, this is something new for you. So you've done the 3 historical China books. Why London 1700s cabinets of Barnaby, Maine? Tell us about it.
So yes, the book is set in London in the early 18th century, but actually the path that led me to this setting did begin with my first book, which very briefly is called Jade Dragon Mountain, and I wrote it during the time I spent in Southwest China, in this city that rests at the foot of the real Jade Dragon Snow Mountain. And that book is also set in the early 18th century, and it's about an exiled librarian named Li Du who solves the murder of a Jesuit traveler. But something I didn't know before I started writing books is that by the time you finish writing one, you've created a lot of ghosts, these ghosts of characters who didn't end up finding a place in the story, or ghosts of plot points that had to be deleted. And the Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine started with one of those ghosts. So in Jade Dragon Mountain, I modeled one of the characters on a man named James Cunningham. And he was a Scottish ship surgeon who journeyed to China in 1696. And when he announced that he was going to do it, it was this really big deal because very few Westerners were going to China at that point. And when he said that he was going, he was given instructions written instructions from a London apothecary on the proper methods for collecting and preserving plants to bring back to England. So the character I wrote, who was inspired by Cunningham, didn't end up playing as big a role as I thought he would. But I had done a lot of this research that I hadn't used, and I'd learned a little bit about the community of collectors who were waiting in England for items like Cunningham's pressed plants. And these collectors, they weren't just interested in the beautiful, rare, never before seen flowers. You know, they wanted everything: grasses, reeds, mosses, ferns, thistles, everything, because there was this idea that if they could have everything that existed in the world and arrange it and organize it on their shelves, they could understand the world. And I always wanted to follow those plants back from China back to England and enter that community of the collectors. So for my 4th book, that's what I decided to do. And that's how I came to write The Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine.
Excellent. And for those of you watching, if you haven't read her series that starts with Jade Dragon Mountain, we absolutely highly recommend it. There's this fabulous storytelling in it, and they've been big hits for us for a long time, and this one is no different. We highly recommend it. So Lindsey, you have written about ancient Rome for some time now. Do you feel like you could just live there part-time?
A lot would be familiar, but I always say that we can never really know what life was like 2,000 years ago. All my job is to persuade people that I do know, whether I'm right or not. I was very interested in what Elsa had to say, because first of all, I envy her writing about the 18th century, which is my thing that I would do if I had life and time. I even have notes ready for doing it one day, though I'm getting so old I don't know if I will manage it. But by one of those amazing coincidences, the Grove of the Caesars is also about collecting. It sets out to be about serial killers, and people will say, oh, the Romans didn't have serial killers, but of course they did, because it's a human floor that will have gone back to the Stone Age, really. But there's a subplot which is about book collecting and actually fakes, which I don't know if you have fake moss and plants, Elsa, but we have fake philosophers and counterfeiters producing fake scrolls. And I had a whale of a time with it, really. I start to answer the question. I start from the premise that the city was different from our cities to some extent, though the street life is the same as street life today. But the people, human nature is just the same. And that makes it familiar.
So I do have a comment from several people in our chat that if you could speak up a little more, it would be appreciated.
Okay, I can probably, if I'm clever, find my thing and turn up my microphone. I speak very softly because I'm British, of course. They're just so polite.
Well, people are fawning over you in the comments, and unsurprisingly, but they would like to hear you just slightly better. So if you can speak up, or if we can get your microphone, that would be great.
What I can. I found the volume knob and it won't move, of course. It's on automatic. That's no good. How's that? Is that better?
Oh, we've got you now. Yes.
Yeah, I can do this stuff. I may be a pensioner, but we have to learn.
It's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so Elsa, we already talked about that you've made a jump in setting. You've talked about the origins of Barnaby, Maine, but where did Cecily K come from?
It's a fun question to answer because there are two parts. So Cecily K and Mackin Barlow, her companion in the book, came in part. They were inspired by a few women that I encountered in my research. One of whom, her name was Elizabeth Blackwell, and she tried to earn enough money to get her husband out of debtor's prison by drawing botanical illustrations. So finding examples of women who were employed in ways we might not expect in that period in history. Also a woman named Maria Sabella Marian, who was a respected and well-regarded insect expert and butterflies and caterpillars in particular at the time. And also a woman named Eleanor Glanville, who was also interested in butterflies and had a more sad story that her family actually used her interest in butterflies. They cited it as evidence of madness when they were trying to take her money from her. So it was a fraught path for women to display this much interest and engagement in a male-dominated intellectual arena. And those three women really inspired me to create these protagonists. But specifically, Cecily, it was difficult for me to come up with a new protagonist. I was really used to Lee Du, and he was such a good friend, and I didn't expect it to be so challenging to get to know someone new so well. And I was really struggling with Cecily. She was a plant enthusiast, a scientist, a traveler. She was really focused on the truth and believing that if you just looked at the truth, everything would work out. But then she was also a little bit roguish and a little bit unpredictable. And it was driving me crazy. She was inconsistent and I wasn't sure how she would react in different situations. And then one day, my good friend from graduate school, Anna, called, and we had one of those kind of conversations you have with a really good friend where you just go right to intense topics, and you, like, over an hour, it's just you're talking about the world and your love lives and your professional lives and your career goals and coming up with all these new ideas. And I hung up the phone and kind of stared at the wall and realized that the problem with Cecily is that I was trying to fit two women into one, and I needed to split her into two characters, and they needed to be able to talk to each other. So that's how Cecily and Mackin became the sort of detective duo in Cabinets.
And what happens in the book? What's the mystery?
So Cecily K has been traveling abroad for some years. Her husband has been working in Smyrna, which is now the city called Izmir in Turkey. And she's come back to England with these plants that she has collected and pressed. And the first thing she does is she wants to go consult the collection of this great collector named Barnaby Maine and look at the plants that he has in order to try to find identifications for the plants that she has found. But when she arrives, things don't go as expected. She runs into this woman, Mackin, she hasn't seen in a very long time. And a few hours later, Barnaby Maine is murdered. So that is the premise for the story.
Sounds good. And Lindsey, you mentioned serial killers in Rome. You want to explore that a little bit more as what's happening in this book?
Well, the background of this book is meant to be gardening, because we have such wonderful evidence of the Roman love for plants and flowers and the peace and quiet that goes with it if you're rich enough to have that kind of leisure. So it's set in an imperial garden across the Tiber from where most of my books are set. And there's something nasty lurking in the shadows. And Albia finds out there's been something nasty lurking in the shadows for decades, but because the victims were mainly prostitutes, or were thought to be prostitutes, the male forces of law and order don't go to very much trouble to investigate. So of course she will, because she's that sort of a girl. Alongside it, I had done some research into serial killers and why they kill, and I found that it's generally reckoned that men kill for different reasons. Men kill for power, basically power over their victims, but it's thought that women kill for either their own security, which can mean financial security, or sometimes because women are nurturing, they excuse their killing by saying they're helping someone who is very ill. And so they kill them off so they won't be in misery anymore. And there's a subplot where that very subtly is interwoven without us immediately realizing that there is another serial killer. And then generally I explore how 2000 years ago, without DNA and forensic tools, they can possibly have investigated that kind of a death, where sometimes the remains are very old and decayed, and sometimes there are no clues and no witnesses will speak because they distrust the police or the people who pass for the police. Albia, of course, finds the critical clue that leads to the chap who has to be arrested.
As you would expect her to. Speaking of her, I like to ask authors this question, and sometimes it goes nowhere, and then sometimes it's a great payoff. So in what ways are you similar and different to your main characters? How are you like her? Let's start with you, Lindsey.
I would say probably most ways. It's really, really nice. What was interesting was to change from writing about a male lead character, even though he was in a partnership with Helena Justina, but to speak in the voice of Albia. She isn't me, and that's one of the skills that a good writer has to work on, of course, that I don't just put my own opinions. I have to try and put the opinions that she would have, strongly influenced by my own opinions. I like her, obviously, that makes life a hell of a lot easier.
How about you, Elsa? You have a little bit in both of them, or how does it divide out?
I think I must, I think even if a writer tries to avoid it, you end up just, fracturing yourself through all your characters, including the villains, certainly. But Cecily, I think I share with her actually, she's a bit of I would like to be more like Cecily in terms of focus and capacity to stick with an idea, and instead of becoming distracted. And in that, I then slip into more Mackin's character, who is slightly more irreverent and prone to thinking more about storytelling than about the facts before her. So I think it's sort of between the two of them, you have some version or other of Elsa.
And you mentioned earlier in the conversation that you were having a problem nailing down the character until you realized it was two. This is kind of similar to the question I'm going to ask, which is, you talked about the character fighting you. In what ways does the character sometimes talk back and take the wheel? Does that happen in your writing?
It happens a little bit. And I'd be so curious to know Lindsey's approach to this, but I'm a very intense outliner. So I always have the whole skeleton of my plot and the clues and when each clue is going to be revealed, and really like a skeleton before I attempt to start writing sentences. So I always expect that my characters aren't going to fight me, but then when you do start writing sentences, I'm always surprised by just putting someone in a room and needing, for the sake of the plot, for Cecily to pick something up or notice something or ask a question, and just not being able to find any way believable within her character for her to walk over to that corner or pick up that thing or ask that question. And sometimes to the extent that I then have to go back to the outline and find a different plot path to get her there. So I do find pushback, and it frustrates me because I like to be so in control.
Well, you're very smart in getting to the crux of this question, which is it's really a thinly veiled do you outline because it always comes up. So how about you, Lindsey? Does Alba come back at you ever?
I am very controlling, but in a different sort of way. I don't allow them to give me any nonsense. They do what I tell them to. But my approach to actually writing is the complete opposite, really, of Elsa's, which just shows that every author has to find their own way of doing it. People will come to you and ask, how do you do it? As if they're thinking, I could be a writer if I knew what she did. But that's not it at all. I will have a very broad idea, at most 4-page synopsis that says more or less what I said to you about the Grove of the Cedars, really. It's gardens, it's serial killers, there may be 2. She solves it. And for me, that's enough, because my method is to sit down with each chapter and think, where are we going to go now? Who are they going to meet? And I want to be excited in the same way that the reader's going to be excited. If I had a detailed skeleton, it would be like painting by numbers for me, and I'd be so bored I wouldn't finish it. So sometimes this gets me into difficulty. The draft I'm working on now is full of my editor saying, I didn't see this coming, in a very puzzled way. Not my American editor, who is very reasonable. Obviously, I'm saying that in case he's listening. My English editor, who is a somewhat tight Englishman and likes to understand what's going on. And half the time I've got it wrong in the draft because I didn't know where it was going to go. And I will get ideas for clues, occasionally even ideas for who did it as I go along. It does all seem to work out, I hope.
I think so. I think your publishing track record proves that your method works for you, for sure. So I'm going to take just a minute here to say that if you're just joining us, I'm McKenna, I'm the owner of Murder by the Book. I'm talking with Lindsey Davis about Grove of the Caesars and Elsa Hart about the Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine. If you're interested in ordering their books, we do have signed book plates from them. Also, if you've missed the beginning and you wait until this video is done live, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning here on Facebook, or give us about 24 hours and we'll have it uploaded on our YouTube channel, where you can find dozens of our other virtual author events and lots of recommendations. So P.D. James once said that there were only 4 motives for murder: love, lust, loathing, or lucre. Do either of you have a favorite motive for your books?
I don't think I have a favorite. I like to vary it from book to book, because when you're writing a long series, I don't want them to be all the same. There are people who write the same book over and over again, and their readers feel comforted by that because they know where they're going. But I would be bored writing it, and I want to jump around. It's more fun for me to think, wonder how money works, and then have a go at that.
Yeah. Elsa?
I agree with Lindsey. It's fun to jump around and also to explore the subcategories within those categories. Love is a good one, because within love is hate and toxicity and violence and self-love and love of people or love of things or love of money. So that one feels so broad that I think I could find variety within it and do, but looking for motives and choosing one is one of my favorite parts of the process, because it's how the characters start to become to feel human. So yeah, I can't pick a favorite, but love if I have to.
You have to remember that in real life, most murders, or many murders anyway, are purely accidental. They're spur of the moment. Someone loses their temper and bashes somebody's head in without having planned it at all, which goes entirely against the detective story theory that it's all been minutely planned by the evil scheming villain. I did write an Albia story where it ended up that somebody had died an accidental death and people hated it.
Well, I imagine people felt like it broke the contract of the reader and writer, that they thought they were solving something the whole time, but it probably was more fun for you to have some variety. So I meant to mention earlier, if you haven't read these authors and you are a paperback reader, we've discussed Jade Dragon Mountain already. And for Lindsey, you can start with the first in the Flavia Alba series, Ides of April, or you can go back and read her first Marga Studios Falco, Silver Pigs. Both are available in paperback, and we always have them in stock. So you're both authors of historical mysteries. Obviously, there's research. What kind of research have you done over the years? What kind of research do you do? And do you have a favorite resource that illuminates your time periods? Elsa, why don't you start on this one?
Let's see. Great and big question. Research. I think probably being able to travel to the places where I've set the books, and even though they're historical fiction, to the geographical area, and just take notes on the way light falls. And in the case of Jade Dragon Mountain, a mountain is looking at it as kind of like time travel, because it's been looking the same for many thousands of years. And it was the same with Cabinets, the too short trip I was able to make to London when I was doing research, and spend so much time in the British Museum and looking at architecture and trying to find a model for the house of Barnaby, Maine, because it's a very house-centered story. So I really needed to be able to picture the rooms and what you'd be able to see or hear from the stairwells on the different floors. So finding spaces and objects in museums is really important to me, and then really supplementing that almost on a chapter by chapter level with historical details through books, through nonfiction, and as many primary sources as I can get my hands on.
How about you, Lindsey?
It's an interesting question, really, because I have now spent more than 30 years researching a subject that I wasn't educated in as my primary field. And I think I've mastered it. I was brought up to be very thorough. So I do everything that I possibly can. There's a very limited number of primary sources on the Roman world, which is quite useful because you soon get through them. They are mostly translated into English as well, which is very helpful. I agree very much with Elsa that to go to a place is one of the best things you can do. And it's a great sadness to me at the moment to think, when will I be able to go to Italy again, and Rome in particular? I'm having to think maybe I never will. So what am I going to do then? Use my memory. That's the resource that people don't talk about, but for an author it's absolutely vital. I also think that these days the internet is very useful, because even if it's not your own academic discipline, other people are using the internet, and it's accessible in a way that when I started, it wasn't. If you weren't a classicist, you couldn't read what was in the Classical University's library when I was growing up as a writer. It's all there, and you can, which helps a lot. But the main thing that I would like to say is it's not for the research when you're a historical novelist. The research is there as a tool, but you're not going to be writing the research, or you're going to be writing a terrible novel. It's about the people, it's about what.
And we have sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that does mean that if you don't know something, it doesn't matter. You just don't mention.
Fair enough. Yes, one of the comments here on Facebook is actually mentions the fact that what is one of the primary strengths of your books is that the people feel so real, and that the history is, surrounding that. Do you still do research on ancient Rome for each book, or do you?
Yes.
Yes.
Because in the first place, I love it. I love doing it. And I think that is one of the things that makes the books good, that people can sense my own enthusiasm, and they gain the same excitement from that. And there's always new stuff. I pride myself in being as up to date as I can. The main thing I did, the best thing I ever did, was in one of the books about Falco. He's in Rome and London, and he walks into a building and discovers a fancy water wheel. And I wrote that the day after the press notice, when the Museum of London announced they had found it. The only difficulty was that in their press notice, they said it worked one way, and later they revised their opinion, damn them, and had it work a different way. But nobody has yet picked me up on that.
That's great. So throughout all your research over the years, is there any great story or tidbit that you came across that has stuck with you? It's like, that's a great piece of information.
The thing that everybody wants me to say is that for bleaching, they used human urine, and you could pee in a pot and the tax would be imposed by Vespasian. And that's how he rebuilt Rome. It's just one of the, I personally am totally unmoved by that story, but it's one that everybody loves. What
story moves you?
One of the ones that stayed with me and became sort of a core of the mood and tone for cabinets, at least, was either a letter or essay that was written by a man named Hans Sloane, who was this renowned collector of curiosities at the time, and he was entering into this debate that was going on about these enormous skulls that had been unearthed in Sicily. And the debate was over whether they were the skulls of ancient subterranean giants, or possibly the Cyclops or gods from Greek mythology, or possibly elephants. And it was this completely straightforward in tone scientific paper trying to figure out which of these was the most likely explanation. And that really just helped me get into this crazy world I was going to inhabit for a few months.
Can I just say that this is one of the things where we find that human nature doesn't change, because in Roman times, they had exactly the same fascination with giant bones, and the Emperor Augustus collected them up in a little museum because they had the same questions about them.
Wow. So a little bit of inside baseball here, talking about sales at the bookstore. So I can run reports as the owner as to which sections sell most. And there's a turnover report, which essentially means how many times throughout the year has this one section completely sold through. Not necessarily every book, but in volume. And hands down, every year, nothing else close, historical mysteries are the winner. We sell more historical mysteries, by volume than any other section in our store, American, British, foreign, any of them. So I just was wondering if either of you have an opinion on the enduring popularity of historical mysteries.
It's interesting to reflect that when I started in the late 80s, it wasn't like that.
No.
Historical novels as a whole were supposed not to sell. Historical novels about the ancient world were just, oh, no. Every major publisher in London refused to take mine because they were too scared of them. And the only historical mysteries that people seemed to know about were Ellis Peters' Brother Cadfael stories. So everybody was asking me, did you model it on Brother Cadfael? And in fact, I hadn't even read them. I knew Ellis Peters as Edith Pargeter, and I'd read those books of hers. So I feel really old now, I have seen this whole thing change. And the big fear for us is, will there be something new that will knock us aside? I don't think so.
It's funny because I certainly don't ask these questions wanting to make you feel old, but it's also, I can't ignore the fact that, I mean, your historical mysteries were the forerunners for this genre, you and Ellis Peters. And so that's why I was so excited. One of the reasons so excited to talk to you today. Excuse me. So
see you, absolutely. It's because it's a kind of escapism that isn't always available in other kinds of novels, where you can go into a completely different world and it removes you from the troubles that are bothering you. Lots of people now saying, thank goodness we've got your books to read during lockdown, because we can find solace, really, which is a wonderful thing for an author to feel they're producing.
And Elsa, any insights?
I so agree with Lindsey about it being an escape to another world. I think also that there's an allure or a fascination with finding these commonalities between people today and people in the past, and that doing that through the mystery genre works well because, going back to the P.D. James quote, there are these fundamentals to the mystery genre, these motives, kind of formulas and patterns into which the stories fit, and to have those to have that set structure as a way to ground a window into a time that was so different. I think at least that's the appeal to me, partly as a reader of historical fiction.
Technically, it's extremely useful if you are a laid-back kind of approacher, as I have described myself. It's very good to have this basic structure that something bad happens, there's an investigation which you can make be whatever it is, and hopefully at the end there's going to be a solution to it, or an ambivalence, of course, very occasionally, but I think that's not as popular with readers. They want to feel that resolution coming through, and then it makes the book very satisfying. So the mystery genre will always be there because of that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And we found, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Anyone who's been watching these has already heard me say that, particularly in the past few months, we have sold more traditional style mysteries, whether it's Golden Age, whether it's Agatha Christie, books that have a beginning, something terrible happens, and then a resolution with a bow tied around it, and the world is all better. We've sold more of those than anything else for these past few months, because I strongly agree with you that people are looking for solace, especially in a difficult time right now. And if it's just in their reading or their escape from what's going on, you know, whether they're visiting ancient Rome or 1703 London or, you know, and then there were none, they are getting some kind of resolution, and that's definitely wanted.
And it gives kind of psychological hope, because if some amazing mystery that seemed totally unsolvable has been solved, if they can solve that, maybe we can solve this terrible predicament that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of actually the writing profession and routine, I always have questions, although everyone is silent. I think that everyone's fascinated with your responses and no one's asking questions. So if you have questions, put them in the comments. I'll keep going for the time being. What is, as far as process, what does a writing day look like for you? And why don't we start with you, Elsa?
It depends a little bit what phase I'm in, whether it's research or plotting or writing. It tends to ramp up in intensity. When I'm researching, a lot of the time is what feels or might look from the outside like empty time. It's a lot of going to a museum and then lots of long walks and thinking and imagining and reading. So there isn't much of a schedule. Then as I get into outlining and plotting, I try to treat it like a work day, just so that I can keep some sort of structure in my life and remember to get dressed and things, because I do sometimes forget. So to start at about 9, take a break for vegetables and hummus for lunch, and then keep going and finish the day at 5. But the problem is there's something about doing that almost every time, especially as it gets more intense and I'm really writing. At 4:15 is when suddenly kicks in and all the ideas come. So I say I'm going to stop at 5, and then in my most productive time ends up being 5 to 10. So don't listen to my answer, because honestly I'm not very good at this.
Fair enough. At least you have an aspirational answer.
Exactly.
Lindsey?
Well, I am more laid back, probably. I'm governed entirely by my deadline date. I have handed in over 30 books, almost all on deadline day, and I'm very proud of that. I'm shocked and horrified when I hear of people who haven't. And that means that I start off not doing very much, but towards the end of the period, the last month I don't go out. I clear my diary. Friends don't see me. Some of them haven't noticed, and when lockdown happened, they thought they could ring me up or email me or Zoom with me. No, I'm writing now because I don't want to be told off if I don't hand it in on time. That is another aspect of being old. I think modern children aren't as scared of being told off as we. I have been doing it for a long time. I've had a lot of practice on the kind of books I'm writing, and I physically don't write very much in the day because I think about it. I look at what I did yesterday. I see where I have to go. I sit down. I do it. I do not mess about. And I very rarely have to change things these days. I can remember when I first started, whole books had to be restructured, but that doesn't happen anymore. And this is right, because if I don't know how to write a Falco or an I'll Be a Story by now, it will be a poor thing, Lindsey. Right.
We have a question from the comments. Dean James, who I think you have met over the years, asks that he heard you talk about a story regarding researching sewers in Rome, and would you recount that story?
We haven't got time. This is my big, with gestures, story. But basically what it comes down to is that I was writing Three Hands in the Fountain, one of the best titles I ever thought up by accident. I was offered by a young archaeologist who's now a professor, whose mother had been the fiction editor of Woman's Realm, and she told him he had to look after me in Rome and show me stuff that wasn't generally available. And unbeknown to me, he was writing a thesis on aqueducts and therefore on sewers, because they are joined together. And he got me a permit to go down under the Forum of Nerva. I am absolutely terrified of anything that means you climb up a ladder or you go down a ladder, but I had to do it. An Italian ladder is a very difficult thing, unlike English ladders and I'm sure American ladders, where the rungs are spaced at the proper distance. They are very wide apart, and the ladder that was produced wasn't long enough, so they had to tie it together in the middle with string, and then the hole wasn't very big, so the ladder was very upright, which meant a man had to have a piece of rope on it to stop it wobbling about because it wasn't at a suitable angle. And I went down with cries from my loved one, Richard, of whatever you do, darling, don't let go. No, I could barely move. And Will, the archaeologist, whose mother was the fiction editor of Woman's Realm, this is relevant why he shouted out, "Remember, Lindsey, you are doing this for the honour of British womanhood." I was dressed in a plastic mat, wellies, and marigold washing up gloves because we had to be covered up, or Weil's disease, which is born in rat's pee, might have got us and killed us. On the way back, I got stuck. That just doesn't bear thinking about. But it was good research because I got the best joke in the book out of it. When I came up, I had to take my wellies off, and I was then able to have Falco say, as I thought, "When you've been down the sewer, nobody will help you to pull off your boots." And that's the kind of historical research you can't do from primary sources or videos or museums. You have to be there. Luckily, I will never have to do it again. I'll just remember last time.
And we have a couple people asking Elsa if there's any chance she'll return to Lee Do, or if this is the start of a new series.
Yes to both, really. Lee Do is still very much in my mind, sort of a constant companion, and I would love to return to him and to Hamza sometime, and follow their continued travels. But I do have an idea for the next book in a Cecily and Mackin series that takes Cecily back to her home, the place she grew up, and to a mystery set there. So that's what I've been working on now. But I haven't forgotten Lee Do, I promise.
So that is my follow-up question. What are you working on now? So that book, and Lindsey, did you just get a new Flavia Alba turned in?
I did indeed. It's set at Saturnalia, a period I love writing about because you can make it so funny. I will say no more because I don't talk about books that haven't yet been edited in case he changes it all.
Fair enough. And your American editor is watching. So yeah. So we have another question for Lindsey. Ginny asks, you clearly have a love of dogs and a dislike of cats. Do you have a dog, and are the dogs in your books based on past pets?
If that's the Ginny, I think she knows I don't have a dog. But one reason is that until recent events, I would have had to leave my dog behind when I went out to do research, to travel, or to do public events. And it seemed to be unfair both to the dog, the hypothetical dog, and to me, having to leave it. I am not fond of cats for various reasons, but I know I must just not dwell on that because lots of people are. I'd rather have a dog.
Elsa, just to include you, do you have a preference?
Definitely dogs. And also I know many people who love cats and entirely respect their opinion and have had cordial relationships with many cats, but dogs just delight me. I don't have my own though.
And Lindsey, Ginny has responded, okay, yeah, I knew that, but I love your dogs in the books. So I think she was just setting you up for that answer. We did have a question, do we have signed book plates? Yes, we have signed book plates for both of these, and we would love nothing more than for you to order the books. On that note, if you are struggling with ordering books right now, or you buy them digitally or other ways, and you'd still like to help support our author series, we do have a virtual tip jar in the comments. I always feel a little weird saying that, but given that it's unusual times, if you have any extra money you want to send our way to keep these coming, we would certainly appreciate you buying us a cup of coffee or something. But of course, our preference would be for you to order books. Let's see. I think that might be all the questions we have from there. So I'm going to move on to another question I have. Speaking about reading taste, so do you read within the genre? And if so, who are some of your favorites to read? And also, who are some of your influences to being a writer? Lindsey.
All right. I hate being asked about influences because
then we'll ignore it. Just, you don't have to answer.
No, I've got to explain that because it implies that you model yourself on whoever you name as an influence. And I think that my way of writing is very idiosyncratic and personal. And so I'm not going to answer that. One of the sad things about being a writer by profession is that it's your job. So when you want relaxation, you do something else. I do gardening mostly, or I used to before COVID, go to the theatre and to concerts. Now I'm doing triple gardening instead. I read a lot of biography. Obviously history has always been my thing, although my degree is actually in English. But I do read biography from choice. And I'll read about anyone if they have an interesting life.
Elsa, how about you?
I too, my relationship with reading, at least reading historical fiction and mysteries, did change when I started writing, exactly for the same reason of just needing a break. But I do have to acknowledge Agatha Christie as an influence. I mean, I was basically my earliest chapter books were Agatha Christie, and listening to the BBC audio productions of mysteries, it was just, I was fascinated by them basically since elementary school. So her stories and her formula for telling stories is deep in my head. But usually for pleasure reading, when I'm not completely busy or overwhelmed with research, I do like science fiction and fantasy a lot is my escapist reading. I just started the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and I'm really enjoying that. It's taking me to an entirely different place and much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I wrap this up, for any of the interviews that I do, if I have time, I like to get to know the authors just a little bit better, not just about your books. And so I use some questions from the Proust questionnaire. So for people who are unfamiliar with that, Marcel Proust came up with this group of questions in the late 1800s that he would ask people at cocktail parties, and essentially they would, in theory, get to the heart of a person. So I have a few Proust questionnaire questions, none too morbid or dark or extremely difficult, that I'm gonna end with. So we'll alternate turns. So this one I'll start with Elsa, and then the next one I'll start with Lindsey, because it's kind of, the first person's always at a disadvantage. So Elsa, what is your most prized possession? And I always say something inanimate.
Oh my goodness. It is hard.
I'm sorry.
My most, especially because, yeah, possessions in particular, my most prized possession would probably have to be I have a special box. It was the first gift that my husband gave me, and it's the only thing I allow on my writing desk, which I like to be very empty. So special box.
Yeah, the thing you would save in a fire, essentially, that's not a living creature. Grab probably your laptop and then the box.
Probably the laptop, and then, although everything's in the cloud now, so.
Truth. How about you, Lindsey?
I don't have everything in the cloud. I don't trust the cloud. I'm going to show you mine because it's on me.
Oh, beautiful.
It's my, again, it's a gift from the man in my life, which I would never have thought he would have got me, but he, many years ago, came up with this, and it's got coloured bezels which you can change to match your outfit, though they don't usually exactly match. And I think if I lost this bezel watch, it would break my heart, really, because he's now died, and it represents everything that he was to me.
Wonderful. So we'll start with you, Lindsey. What is your current state of mind?
Stroppy. Resigned. I have not found lockdown to be very hard at all, because it's what it's always like when I'm writing. In fact, I think I've coped with it much better than many people I know. So I'm just myself, really.
I have found that in interviewing writers during this time period, any questions about routine changes, unless they have small children in the house, any questions about routine changes, they're good. This is what they do. They sit at home and write. Elsa, what's your current state of mind?
I wish I could barely use the word stroppy, but I think in one word, unsettled. I do feel unsettled and off kilter. It's a little bit harder to sink into and stay into the zones I usually like to occupy.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm struggling with that as well. So we'll start with you this time, Elsa. What is the trait you most admire in a person?
Just compassion. It's a good word, compassion.
Lindsey?
I think I'd say, as well as that, honesty.
Yeah. Lindsey, which talent would you most like to have?
I would like to be a champion ice dancer.
That's a first I've heard. I hear a lot about singing, but no ice dancing. Is there a story to that?
No, I couldn't do it. My ankles are too weak. I'm not a physical person at all, but I dream of it.
It is a beautiful sport. Elsa, how about you? I
think facility for learning languages would be, I would love to, I mean, which is not to not acknowledge the incredible amount of work of learning a language. So maybe I just like my talent to be not being such a lazy person, but to be able to learn languages easily, I would love that.
I think some people take to it more naturally than others. So I think it's a fair talent goal. So my last question for you today, before I wrap up, let me just make sure if no more questions, although lots of people enjoying. So I will go ahead, a little bit more housekeeping before my final question. Murder by the Book, we are still closed to the public. We would love nothing more than for you to call us. We can give you recommendations over the phone. You can place orders online. We do, as I've said, have signed book plates to go along with Cabinets of Barnaby, Maine and The Girl of the Caesars. We are, of course, very appreciative to both of these ladies for joining us today, as well as the folks at Minotaur Books for helping facilitate this. So before we wrap up, the final question, and I think it's Lindsey's turn. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Being asleep.
Okay. Elsa?
Being with Robbie on hiking a mountain trail.
Sounds delightful. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure for me. It's been an honor to get to speak to you, Lindsey Davis. This is just fantastic. And Elsa, it's been a joy. We highly, highly recommend both of these authors' works in paperback and hardcover. You can't go wrong. Please consider giving them a chance. Obviously, they are delightful. So anyway, thank you all for joining us and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.